Good morning, everybody. Hi, welcome to International Women's Day. Yay! And it's also been Endometriosis Awareness Week this week. I think it's also Endometriosis Awareness Month throughout March, which is why this week in the group and on my page I've been sharing nutritional tips that can be supportive if you're trying to manage endometriosis. So today we're going to quickly summarise those tips, and we've also got some great questions that have been asked in the group and via email as well, and so I'll be covering those. So we're going to be talking about endometriosis, but also about period problems in general, so heavy periods, painful periods, all the usual things that we have to deal with on a monthly basis for a good kind of 30 years of our life. So I'll just start with a quick summary of what endometriosis is, if anybody's not sure. So this is a condition that affects about just over 1.5 million women in the UK, and that's probably a very conservative estimate because it does take a long time for most women to receive a diagnosis of endometriosis. And it's a condition where tissue that normally resides within the womb is growing outside of the womb, and it can grow anywhere in the body. So you can have womb tissue attached to the bowel, you can have it growing in your lungs, you can have it growing in your eyes, and basically it just kind of moves where it wants to, and it can grow there. And because it is womb tissue, it responds to the hormonal fluctuations that we have every month. So the tissue will still bleed at menstruation time. So if you've got endometriosis within the lungs, for example, or within the bowel, there is an exit route. But in other places, for example, endometriosis tissue can grow kind of on the lungs, or it can grow on the ovaries, and the blood has nowhere to go. It hasn't got an exit route, so it forms these very sticky, painful, inflamed adhesions, and the kind of organs can get stuck together by the womb tissue. The full kind of pathophysiology, the reasons why we have endometriosis are still not fully understood. There's lots of different theories. It's possibly an autoimmune condition because the immune system seems to accommodate this extra tissue rather than attacking it. And we know that women who have autoimmune conditions are more likely to have endometriosis and vice versa. So there is a link there. Obviously, it affects fertility. The fallopian tubes can get blocked. There's lots of hormonal disruptions, the amount of inflammation that's going on, lots of different ways in which it can affect fertility. And essentially the whole kind of peritoneal cavity all around in the abdomen where the womb is, there's a lot more inflammatory chemicals and immune cells flowing around there. So we get a lot of pain and inflammation. One of the main kind of factors about endometriosis is that it tends to be an estrogen dominant condition, so there's a lot more estrogen flowing around, and that is something that nutrition can support with, because we can support how the estrogen is detoxified through the liver, how you eliminate the estrogen through the bowel to try and bring about a slightly better balance. Morning Radka, nice to see you here. So that's something that we'll be covering as well. So the main tips that I shared this week, the first one was identifying that link between autoimmune conditions and endometriosis, because this is something that people may not realise. So you can have endometriosis and you may also be predisposed to other autoimmune conditions, for example underactive thyroid, rheumatoid arthritis. So it's always worth mentioning to your GP, exploring these issues. If you are having other health conditions, make sure that they do check out that there isn't an autoimmune factor involved there. For a lot of women, it may be a link with thyroid, because women are more prone to thyroid conditions than men. And quite often the autoimmune side of a thyroid problem isn't picked up. Doctors are often only testing, and this is due to financial constraints and things. It's not that doctors don't have an understanding of this in most cases, but they will often only check a small factor to do with thyroid and not necessarily explore whether it is an autoimmune problem or not. So that was an important thing that I wanted to highlight, so that you're aware of that link there. The next tip that we looked at was to do with fibre, so talking about ground flax seeds and psyllium husks. They provide soluble fibres that are really helpful in lots of different ways. So one of the main ways that we can help to balance estrogen levels is to make sure that it actually leaves the body. And I'm talking about through poo, basically. You have to poo your estrogen out. You have to poo all your hormones out. They've got to be detoxed and they've got to be eliminated. The kinds of gentle fibres that you get in ground flax and in psyllium, they don't irritate the gut, so they don't have a laxative effect at all, but they help to bind to the detoxified hormones in the gut and to take them out through the stools to make sure they actually leave properly. One of the problems that can happen if you are constipated, if you are maybe going every day but not having a properly formed, comfortable bowel movement, is that the hormones can recirculate from the bowel back to the liver and back into circulation again. So we have this recirculation of hormones, and that just adds to the estrogen imbalance. So it's really important to always be working on gut health. And I know I bang on a lot about gut health, but it is really important. These kinds of fibres that you find in the psyllium and in the ground flax also feed and nourish the friendly bacteria. So our gut microbiome, or those billions and billions of bacterial cells that are in our gut, they play a key role in hormone balance too, because they're helping to form the stool, and they also help to regulate and communicate with the immune system. So in terms of dealing with inflammation in the body and immune system imbalance, the gut bacteria have a really vital role to play. There are conditions where we can get imbalances in our gut bacteria. You might be familiar with the term dysbiosis. That just means imbalanced gut bacteria. And in certain cases, we can get overgrowth of certain bacterial strains that are more likely to recycle the estrogen as well. So that is something to take into consideration. So the ground flaxseeds and the psyllium, basically fantastic for helping to make sure the estrogen leaves the body and supports smooth, comfortable, regular bowel movements. We had a great question in the group about, do the seeds need to be ground or are they still effective when they're whole? Well, with flax, I say it's better to go for the ground because the whole seeds are tiny, and unless you can chew every single one of them, which is nigh impossible, they're just going to pass through straight away as they are. You can soak the whole seeds and you can make flaxseed tea. That's lovely to help with constipation. But in terms of getting the fibres and getting all the benefits from the seeds, because the flax seeds have got omega-3 in there as well, which is anti-inflammatory, good protein, I would go for the ground. So either grind them yourself or you can buy the ready ground seeds in the resealable bags that just live in the fridge, and that helps to keep them fresh. It's important to keep them in the fridge because otherwise the oils can go rancid, and you will know when you are eating rancid flax seeds. It is not a pleasant experience at all. So I recommend keeping them in the fridge. If you are struggling with constipation, then soak the seeds and soak the psyllium husks overnight beforehand. So maybe do an overnight oat mixture where you're soaking the oats alongside the ground seeds or the psyllium. And you don't need much, start with kind of half a tablespoon and work your way up. It's always better to start low and slow with fibre so that you don't get too much. Just soak it overnight in whatever kind of milk that you have or water, and then in the morning you'll find it's all kind of gloopy and mucilaginous, and that's what's helping to bind to the old hormones and to make sure everything moves smoothly through the gut. If you don't like that gloopy texture, put them in a smoothie. You won't really notice the difference too much there. Chia seeds is another one. People enjoy the chia seeds as well. You don't really have to grind the chia seeds, but they're doing a very similar job to the flax. Okay, so that was our point about fibre. The next tip that I put up there was talking about detoxification of estrogen through the liver. And we had a great question about what is liver detoxification. I was like, yes, I should explain that really. So when we've got hormones, they've done their job and they're kind of finished doing what they're doing, and they go to the liver. And all our hormones, including estrogen, have to go through two pathways. So it's a bit like two checkpoints on a road that they have to go through. So the first one is called phase 1. And this is where we have little enzymes that kind of prime the estrogen ready to be detoxified. It makes the estrogen water soluble, but you also get some very powerful metabolites. So the estrogen is slightly transformed, and at this point it can be quite unhelpful to us. So we have to make sure it then goes into phase 2. So it's gone through the first checkpoint, it then needs to go through the second checkpoint. And at the second checkpoint is where we have a lot of nutrients like B vitamins, zinc, iron, selenium, sulfur in particular. We've got things like magnesium and vitamin C, all working to bind the estrogen to something else. So this pathway, phase 2, is called the conjugation pathway. And basically the estrogen has to hold hands with something else. It's conjugated to that. And then it travels off to the bowel through our bile. So we need to make sure we've got good liver function, the gallbladder's working efficiently to excrete the bile as well, and then off it travels to the bowel, and then we can eliminate it when we go to the loo. So that's basically the estrogen detox pathways in the liver. If we haven't got enough or good levels of these vitamins and minerals, then the liver can be obviously struggling to do this properly. So we can make sure that we're eating plenty of the right foods. So things like Brazil nuts for selenium, you've got nuts and seeds for zinc. Sulfurous foods tend to be things like eggs and garlic and onions. B vitamins are found throughout lots of different foods, but generally you've got things like avocados, sweet potatoes, chicken, turkey, fish, the red meats, they're good sources as well. All the green leafy veg, and of course, as I'm always banging on about, green leafy veg give us magnesium as well. Yay! So that's fantastic too. So making sure you've got that good varied diet will be supplying plenty of the B vitamins. And if you feel that you need extra, you could always look at supplementation of the B vitamins as well. So that's what's happening to estrogen through the liver. The last point that I was making was about plasticizers and xenoestrogens. So these are toxic chemicals that have a very similar structure to estrogen, and they can disrupt the balance of hormones in our body. So they're called endocrine disruptors. The endocrine system is the whole system in your body that produces hormones. So these are things that we find in kind of plastic packaging, cling wrap. And water bottles are getting a lot better now. You can pretty much always get a BPA-free water bottle, for example, but they use BPA lining tins, a lot of certain Tetra Paks and things. We find it throughout lots of body care products as well. Anything that's stored in plastics can have plasticizers in. Children's toys that are plastic, lots of ways in which these are coming into the food chain, or we may be putting them on our bodies through various body care products and things. So wherever you can, try and limit your exposure to them. And it's now impossible to be completely free of these. It's just part of modern living. But we can do things like storing food in glass containers rather than plastic, never using plastic containers in a microwave, using a glass water bottle, or making sure it's at least a BPA-free water bottle, looking at things like the food packaging that you use as well, and not keeping things in plastic bags. So if something comes in plastic, taking it out of that as quickly as you can and storing it in glass or ceramic. I've got a lovely collection of 1970s brown ceramic bowls that I have gathered from charity shops over the years. So stylish, but fantastic for storing things in, like half a lemon, something like that. And you can get these nice beeswax wraps as well. They're a great alternative to cling film. Looking at the body care products, how what you're putting on your skin, that's all really important too. But the main way we get exposed to toxins is either through food or the air we breathe. So comparatively, what comes in through our skin compared to what we ingest, it's a much lower level, but it is still a very important consideration. And it means you get to try all these fantastic natural beauty care products as well, which is always a good thing. So that was the last point, and quite a key one, because we want to reduce our exposure to these xenoestrogens, because we're kind of trying to keep that estrogen load in the body down a bit. So some of the other questions that were picked up on in the group this week, which relate to periods and menstrual cycle, things like that. So I had a lovely question about supporting the luteal phase of the cycle. So this is the second half of the cycle. So your first half of your cycle is where you've got estrogen levels coming up in response to follicle stimulating hormone, and then in theory halfway through, in a day 14, as it says in the textbooks, because we're all bang on a 28-day cycle, aren't we? Yeah, so day 14, we have our peak in luteal hormone. So we get this surge in luteal hormone, and this is in theory when the egg is released, and then the second half of the cycle is called the luteal phase, where we've got progesterone levels coming up as well. So for some women, they may find that they have a very short luteal phase. So they can measure from ovulation to when their period starts. And in theory, that's going to be another kind of 14 days if we're working on this idea of a 28-day cycle. But you may find that your luteal phase is very short. It may only be a week, may only be a few days. Which is going to affect fertility because that's not long enough for the corpus luteum to develop, for the progesterone levels to get high enough to be able to support conception. So looking at how we can support the luteal phase is an important factor. There are certain herbs that can help with this. So there's a lovely herb called Agnus castus, which supports that second half of the cycle as well. There's other various herbs that have hormonal balancing effects because they provide the precursors, the kind of steroid precursors to us to make these hormones. So it can be worth seeing a medical herbalist to ask about these things and to make sure that they're going to give the right herb that's right for your circumstances. In terms of foods, it tends to be more about, again, balancing the estrogen because quite often it's that estrogen dominance, so it's that relative level. So if you've got low progesterone but you've also got low estrogen, then relatively speaking, they're both low and your ratio may still be in balance even though they're both low. But sometimes if your progesterone is low and your estrogen is right up here, that's going to cause more problems too. So I'd still work on doing the detox pathways through the liver with those kinds of nutrients, making sure gut health is good. Things like acupuncture can be very helpful as well because it can look at supporting the entire endocrine system, how all the hormones are communicating, because we don't have a problem in one area of the hormones, usually without something else being out of balance. So it may be stress that's affecting it. Stress hormones can affect our levels of estrogen and progesterone. It could be thyroid imbalance as well. So it's important to rule out any other areas of the endocrine system that may be out of balance. So I hope that is helpful there. And then the last question that we got asked was about what is best to eat when you can only manage to eat small amounts. And this may be true for a lot of women, particularly if they're managing endometriosis because of the ongoing pain and discomfort, crippling discomfort that it can give. Or it may be that you've got very heavy, painful periods. So just for that short amount of time in the month, then it's going to be causing problems. So blood sugar balance is really important. So rather than, if you can only eat small amounts, rather than grazing on the sugary, sweet things, which I know, particularly when you've got PMT, the dairy milk looks more appealing than the apple. I understand that. But if we can look at just having smaller regular meals, so it may be that you have, say, 4 or 5 smaller meals spaced out about every 3 hours rather than your 3 main meals. Sorry, Facebook is just telling me something, so I'm just going to get rid of that. So looking at the quality of what you can eat is important. So trying to always include some protein with each little mini meal. So that may be some slow cooked meat because that is easier to digest than, say, fried meat, or grilled meat. Slow cooking something as a soup or a stew or a casserole makes it easier to digest. So it could be something like some porridge with some ground seeds that have been soaked overnight, and then you add in a little bit of stewed apple. So you've got a lovely gut supporting breakfast there, and you've got your protein from the seeds and the nuts. It could be a soup or a small amount of slow cooked meat, or it could be some fish or protein based that's vegetarian protein, so it could be lentils, beans, pulses, those kinds of things. But just looking at having these smaller meals and always going for cooked foods rather than raw, because the cooking process starts to break the food structure down a bit to make it less effort for your digestive system to have to deal with. Drinking plenty of water, and looking at some kind of soothing herbal teas as well that can just help to support your digestion. So maybe ginger tea, fennel tea, chamomile tea, those kinds of things can be supportive too. But basically, if you can't eat very much, then really do try and steer clear of the refined, processed, sugary things, those kind of packaged foods, because they're just going to give you that quick burst of blood sugar and then you're going to crash again. Whereas if you can have smaller amounts of the more stable, cooked, warming foods, and that's going to help support your energy levels and your blood sugar balance, which in turn has a positive effect on hormone balance as well throughout the day. Okay, so I hope that has been helpful. If you do have any questions after watching this, then please feel free to post in the group. It can be about endometriosis or periods, anything to do with menstrual health in general. This is such an important topic that isn't discussed enough. It's one of the big kind of inequalities in healthcare is around women's health problems because the research isn't always done very well, and there's not enough kind of discussion and openness about it. So I think it's a really important conversation to be having, and I'm always happy to answer any questions to do with menstrual health. I'll do the best I can to answer them. If I don't know the answer, I'll try and find somebody that does. And so I wish you all a very happy International Women's Day and a lovely weekend. Thanks for watching.